We are so glad you came, and we're excited to hear Bob as he comes to speak for us in just a few minutes. I wanted to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do here in the city. My name is David Larson, and together with my wife Shirley, we work with Cru City Ministry. And Cru City Ministry is part of Cru, which used to be called Campus Crusade for Christ. And so we work with the city ministry of Cru, and it's in over 30 cities around the country. We have been with them for a number of years, and the mission is really to advance the mission of Jesus for the well-being of our city. That's what it's all about. And our goal is to connect people to life-changing relationships. And we do that in three ways. The first person we want to connect people to is Jesus. He's the one that made them, he's the one that loves them, and the one that wants to have a personal relationship with them. Secondly, we want to connect individuals to other people in community, and so they can grow together in their faith, they can grow in life in general. And we do this through our men's and women's Bible study groups that meet on a weekly basis. All of them meet at noon, they're all around the city. And at the end, we'll talk a little more about that, on how you can get involved. And then the last one is really to help people, individuals, to find the purpose for why they're on this planet. We want to help them to learn and to know why they're here, and that they can contribute, and they have value, and they can make a difference in this world. So that's what we're about with Cru City, to help people connect to life-changing relationships. It is my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Bob Tiede. And Bob Tiede is a good friend. I've known him for a long time, and he is one of the most gracious people I know. And I am excited he's with us here today to share. It's going to be good. So I'm really thankful for Bob coming up. Bob is coming back to his home state today. He grew up in Parkston, South Dakota, on a farm, and he graduated from the University of South Dakota. His wife, Sherry, grew up in the Arnold's Park area, and right there on Lake Okoboji. And so they met at college, and they were both involved with Cru ministry there. In 1971, they joined the staff of Cru. They spent their first 8 years with Cru campus in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon. In 1979, the national director of Cru brought Bob and Sherry together with Josh McDowell. And for the next 24 years, they served with the Josh McDowell Ministry, which is a division of Cru, where Bob served as the CEO. In 2003, they stepped down away from their role with Josh to accept roles on both the Cru Global and U.S. leadership development teams, developing the next generation of leaders for Cru. Bob, in 2012, launched his blog, leadingwithquestions.com, which is now followed by leaders in over 200 nations around the world. Bob is the author of 2 free ebooks, Great Leaders Ask Questions, and 339 Questions Jesus Asked. Bob is giving as gifts to each of you today the printed versions of these books. I'm sure you've already found them on both versions, along with the CD or the audio book on your table. And those gifts are for you today, so don't leave without them. Bob and Sherry are the proud parents of 4 adult children and the super proud parents of 6 incredible grandchildren, all of whom love to ask their Papa Bob questions. Join me in welcoming Bob Tiede to our Leadership Summit.
It is always fabulous to be back in my home state. A little test for you as we get going. For those of you who are native South Dakotans, how many natives do we have here? And I assume the rest of you got here as fast as you could. And we do have some guests from Iowa. If you're from Iowa and a guest today, raise your hands. They're great. How about any Minnesotans? Fabulous. You're all welcome. Any Nebraskans? And, there are 6 states that have been privileged to live this close to South Dakota. Now, here's a question. Would a real South Dakotan ever say our state is sparsely populated? The answer is no. I learned this from my dad many years ago. A real South Dakotan will always say, it is very exclusive. We don't come from or live in a state that just anybody can be a part of. This is a very exclusive place. And here's another question, just to test your South Dakota knowledge. This will be helpful to the Iowans and the other ones. Why, in applying for statehood, the Dakota Territory apply to enter as two states, North and South Dakota? Today, the combined population of both states is less than 2 million. Why did they choose to enter as two states? Anyone know? This is true. This is not just a joke. It is because they wanted to have twice as many senators as Texas or New York or California. And guess what Dakota has today? Twice as many senators. I was in Washington, D.C. a couple years ago, shared this thought with Senator John Thune, and he confirmed it and then told me something I didn't know. He said, Bob, we actually applied for statehood a few years earlier. It was a Democratic-controlled Congress. They feared 4 Republican senators. Of course, that hasn't always been the case, but they feared that. And so we were not admitted. It was first when Congress became Republican-controlled that North and South Dakota were admitted in 1889. So I am in my heart, even though we've lived in Texas for many years, I'm a South Dakotan. And just delighted to be back. Now, do we have any graduates from South Dakota State present? Raise your hands. Okay. Just want to let you know that I didn't have the grades to go there, so I had to go to the university. I've got a few questions as we get going. I'd like you to raise your hands. Are you here today because you want to grow as a leader? Put your hands up if that's true. Fabulous. Second question, are you here today because you're looking for additional ways to get better results from your people than the usual command and control? And a final question, would you love to become a better listener? Well, at the end of the day, we're going to check to see how we did. Those are my goals for this time. Here's another question. Are you familiar with TA? Anybody know what TA stands for? It's an organization. Some of you may have heard or be familiar with AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, TA is Tellers Anonymous. I'm a charter member. I go to my meetings and I stand up and say, hello, my name's Bob. I'm a teller. And they say, hello, Bob, because they're all tellers too. Now, some of you might discover today that you also are charter members. You just didn't know it. And I grew up with a perspective that a leader's job was to, of course, be kind and appreciative of your staff, but a leader's job was to be directive. It was to tell your staff, your employees, what needed to be done. I mean, tell them kindly, appreciate their effort, but that leadership, my only paradigm was that you needed to tell. And then in 2006, I was in a Borders bookstore and I came across a book, and I like going to bookstores, and I'm always in the leadership section, and I'll pick up a few, peruse them. Anytime they all go back on the shelf. But that day I discovered the book by Dr. Michael Morport called Leading with Questions. I'd only, paged through a few pages and said, this one's going home. And it was a page turner for me. And reading that book, I point back and say that book forever changed my paradigm on leadership, because reading that book, I saw there was another way to lead, a way that I had never, ever thought of. And that was to lead by asking, to lead with questions. And from that day forward, the reality is I am addicted to telling. You're going to pick that up even in the talk. And leading with questions does not come naturally, but I've embraced it as a better way to lead. It requires intentionality on my part. It requires continually reminding myself, okay, don't tell them, how could you ask them? And then to figure out the appropriate questions to ask. So that's just a bit of background on how all of this got going for Bob. Here's a great quote. I actually would like to hear some different voices, so I'm going to hand the mic and ask somebody if they would read this. Would you read this one for us, please?
Absolutely. An effective leader will ask questions instead of giving direct orders.
Thank you so much. And here's another one. The long one.
I started my career as a communications consultant working with managers. Most were intelligent, motivated individuals who were having problems communicating with their team. I keep asking myself, why aren't they as effective as they want to be? The answer came back loud and clear. They were telling, not asking.
Thank you. Thank you. Also, as you finish eating, we're informal today. If you want to pick up your chairs and turn around so that you can see better, feel free to do that. Okay, I need to ask someone else to read a quote.
A fool finds no pleasure in understanding, but delights in sharing his own opinions.
Thank you. Own opinions, yeah, King Solomon. Well, in leading, and I'm just going to have you shout out some answers. In leading, what are the advantages of telling? And let me just say, this is not a trick question. There are advantages in leading to telling.
It's fast.
It's fast. I love that. What else? You can do what you want. It's easier. That's a great point. No ambiguity. Excellent. Other advantages of telling. In fact, reasons why telling in some situations is best.
Authority.
Authority. Fabulous. Thank you. Control. Yes. Another reason, all those are correct, this is not the right answer, is if you're training a new employee who's never done it, asking them, well, how should we do this, may not make any sense at all. They're looking for you to say, here's what the job is, here's how we do this task. So there absolutely are advantages or times when you lead that you need to tell. So what are the advantages, though, of asking questions when you lead? Again, shout these out. Self-discovery, fabulous. Clarity. Buy-in, love that.
More wisdom.
More wisdom, yes.
Creativity.
Creativity, love it. Yes. Who shared more wisdom? Right there. Thank you, Beth. Great to see you. Beth's from my hometown of Parkston. And I haven't seen Beth for, who knows, at least 5 years when she graduated. Let me ask you kind of a silly question, but it'll make a point. If you were in a rowboat with your whole team, a big boat, and there were oars for everyone, and you wanted to get across the lake as fast as possible, how many of them would you like to have row with you? All? Yeah. It's like, okay, Bob, that's not a tough question. Here's the point. Why then, as a leader, would you want to row into the future of where your organization is going, but you're the only one that has the oar in the water? Why would you not want to access the horsepower, the brain power of everyone on the team to get their input on ideas on what might be the best ways forward? And again, it's not a difficult question. It's kind of like, yeah, of course. Yet many times leaders will be the only one rowing. And their team is just sitting and waiting for the leader to say, well, here's what we're going to do. And they don't even have a chance to give input. So, which is better, telling or asking? How many of you think leading by telling is best? Raise your hand. How many of you think leading by asking would be best? Raise your hand. When you're flying, which wing is most important? Right or left? Obviously, both telling and asking are needed? The correct answer is yes, both. Both. Now, truth be known, a whole lot of us are a whole lot more practiced at telling than we are asking. And so today, I'm going to assume if your right arm would be your telling arm, that muscle is well developed. So we're not going to give any attention, not because it's not needed, but because you got that one. You're good at telling. We're going to work on the left arm, the asking arm, because for most of us, that one is not as well developed. It's like we've lifted all these weights only with the right arm, and now the right arm, this left arm now needs a workout. Okay, I need someone to help me with this again.
Leadership is not as much about knowing the right answers as it is about knowing the right questions. Questions are the golden keys that unlock hearts and minds.
Thank you so much. Okay. I need to ask someone a question. And what's your name?
Mike.
Mike, can I ask you a question? In fact, I want to ask you a couple of them. Mike, the first question is, have you mastered the art of looking like you're paying attention when somebody's speaking, when in fact your mind is actually 1,000 miles away? I'm guessing the answer is yes. I'm guessing all of us have mastered the art of looking like we're paying attention, when in fact we're thinking about something completely else. But Mike, what happens the moment someone says, can I ask you a question? You pay attention. No matter where you've been, what, am I going to understand the question? Will I have an answer? That kind of thing. So here's the question, Mike. What did you have for dinner last night?
Pizza.
Where from?
Just home.
Oh, okay. Mike had pizza, they made it at home. Now here's another question, Mike. Again, you, like all of us, have mastered the art of looking like we're paying attention, when in fact, our brain's 1,000 miles away. But where was your brain? Now that was a simple question, but where was your brain from the moment I said, can I ask you a question? I asked you the question and you thought and gave the answer. Where was your brain?
I was with you. I was following you.
Yeah. So, if you want, own may be the wrong word, if you want to access brains of people around your table, telling them will not access it. But as soon as you say, can I ask you a question, it's like you get 100% of their computing skills. Now, had I asked Mike a more complex question, even as Mike started to answer, he would have read my face to see, oh, is Bob happy with that answer? Is Bob kind of puzzled with that answer? Is Bob upset with that answer? And again, without thinking, intuitively, he would have started editing what he's going to say according to what he's seeing just in visual feedback. But I would have had access to his brain that entire time. So if you want to leverage the brain power in the room, around your table, at your office, you've got to ask them questions. Okay, I need a volunteer. Who would like to learn to lead with questions in 30 seconds? Okay, can you stand up? And your name is? Linda? I'm Bob. Good to meet you, Linda. I'm so glad you volunteered for this. Because I can tell just looking at you, Linda, that you have incredible power to memorize. And I believe you will have my 4 favorite questions memorized as fast as you hear them. In fact, we're going to test that in a little bit. And I want to preface this, just hold on, Linda, with a lot of people that I meet, I get the feeling that they would like to learn to lead with questions, but they imagine that to do so, they'd have to get a master's degree in questionology. And it's like, hey, it's a great idea, but I'm never going to have time to do that. So how many of you do have 30 seconds to learn to lead with questions? You're willing to take 30 seconds, okay, just like Linda. Linda, here are my 4 favorite questions. And if a leader will start with these, they actually will be leading with questions. The first question, Linda, is, what do you think? And you would be about something, a challenge and opportunity. But the first question is, what do you think? The second one is, what else? The third one is, what else? The fourth one is, what else? Now, Linda, am I right? Do you have them memorized?
I have them memorized.
Okay.
What do you think? What else? What else? And what else?
Wow. Give her a hand. There they are. Now, again, when it's not part of a conversation, you could think, oh, Bob, that's not really going to work. But when it's part of a conversation, it actually does. So you're asking somebody, here's a challenge, an opportunity, an issue you're facing, and you say, what do you think we might do about that? And they give you an initial answer. And you say, wow, what else? Now, of course, if you say, what else? What else? You know, it's inflection. And you could change this up. You could say, hey, tell me more about that. Wow, hey, let me take notes. This is good. Don't stop now. Research shows that really it's the 3rd or 4th time that you ask what else that you get to their gold nugget. You get to their very best thought. We all instinctively protect ourselves. So when somebody asks us a question, our initial response is usually a safe answer, and we're kind of reading their faces again. How are they treating that answer? If it's like, that's dumb, everyone knows that, well, we're glad we said nothing else, and we're not planning to say anything else. But when they encourage us with, wow, keep talking, what else? It's like we increasingly become comfortable. We increasingly think, they're pretty smart because they appreciate my input. And so, if you haven't led with questions and you want to know how to start, just ask my 4 favorite questions and you will have started. Okay, another volunteer to read this question, please.
The greatest compliment that was ever paid me was when one asked me what I thought and attended to my answer.
Thank you very much. That is one of my favorite quotes. I think I said, read this question, I meant a quote. But let me ask you, when you've had a boss, a supervisor, a director, ask you, hey, what do you think we might do about something? How did that make you feel? Valued? Without your boss, supervisor saying, hey, I think you have a brain, they were actually communicating by asking you the question that they valued your input. They thought you had wisdom to give. Well, if that's true of how you felt when you've had a supervisor ask you what you think, how would those that report to you feel if you asked them what they think? Again, the same. Valued, respected, appreciated. Now, Linda, a few moments ago I shared with you my 4 favorite questions to start with. I now have one more for you to add to the list. And that is, it's kind of a what else question, but it is, can you please tell me more? Now, I use this question, Linda, even when somebody asks me a question. In other words, they ask me a question, and before I answer, I will ask, hey, can you please tell me more? Now, Linda, I'm going to tell you why I asked that. But how many of the men in here are married? Okay? I'm guessing that I'm the only husband in the room that is, this is a confession, as recently as last week, Sherry, that's my wife, started what I thought was asking a question, and I started responding, only to have her put her hand up again. And she calls me Robert. Robert, you don't even know the question you're already trying to tell me what to do. Now, am I right, husbands? I'm the only guy in here that is true of, right? I thought so. It's a confession. The reality is, I know in my head, if I'll wait, hear that whole question, and then say, hey, tell me more about that, I'm much more likely to actually understand the issue. Now, I have a fun little question here, or a little story here. I need a volunteer to read this story. Would you please?
Johnny, age 7, comes running into the house yelling to his mom, "Where did I come from?" Johnny's mom has not been expecting this question. Well, at least not yet. But after taking a deep breath and collecting her thoughts just a bit, she invites Johnny into the living room where she shares all about the birds and the bees. Johnny's eyes are wide as saucers as he takes in every word. When Johnny's mom is finished, she says, "Now Johnny, do you understand where you came from?" Johnny replies, "No. Joey said that he came from California and he asked me where I came from." Do you think Johnny's mom had wished she had responded to Johnny's question with, "Can you please tell me more?"
Thank you. Now that's just a cute little story, but if she'd asked that second question, Johnny would have said, Joey said he came from California and asked me where I came from. And she could have said, well, boy, you were born right here in South Dakota. And he would have ran out the door and been happy, and she could have saved the story for the birds and the bees for another day. Well, it does illustrate that many times, even if we choose to tell, asking, you like this one, Linda? Asking, tell me more. Make sure that even if you're telling, you're at least telling about the right issue, right question. Having you say, please tell me more, also buys you time if you actually want to respond with questions, to think, what next question might I ask? Okay, we're moving on just a bit here. What is your favorite question to ask someone you are connecting with for the first time? Now here I'd like you to take just a minute and share with one or two right beside you what questions you like to ask when you connect with somebody for the first time. I'll give you a minute to share that with people right next to you. I'd like a couple of you to shout out, not what is your favorite question, but what did you hear at your table? What's a question you heard from someone else? Is their favorite question to ask when they connect with somebody for the first time? Where are you from? Where are you from? Are you married? Who are you asking that question of? What else did you hear?
What's your name?
What's your name?
How do you do for a living?
How do you know Bob? What else?
What do you do?
What do you do? Those are all fabulous. It's asking that first question. It's taking the initiative. In any gathering, as we come in, we're kind of wondering, is this going to be a friendly group? How are we going to do, especially if we don't know anyone? And when somebody else takes a step up and just say, hey, what's your name? Where are you from? What do you do? All of those things break the ice, and we actually get more comfortable because now we're connected with somebody. Here's my favorite question. This is not the right answer. This is another answer. And I love just to ask, can you please tell me your story? Everyone has a story. And one of the reasons I like this is it lets them take it wherever they want. Now sometimes if you say, tell me about your family, and they are just in the middle of a breakup, it's an awkward question to answer. If you say, hey, tell me where you work, and they just got laid off yesterday, that could be a bit awkward. But if you say, tell me your story, it lets them take it wherever they want. They don't, in that initial meeting, you're not an investigative reporter trying to put them into a corner. You're just trying to get acquainted. And hearing their story is always fun. Everybody has a story. Here is another question I just absolutely love. Can I get you to read this slide, please?
Okay. How well do you know the people who work for you? Do you know the 3 or 4 events of their lives that have shaped who they are today?
Thank you so much. Cheryl Batchelder has become a friend to Sherry and I. She was the former CEO of Popeyes. When she took over at Popeyes in 2007, Popeyes stock was trading at $10 a share. When she left, it was at $60 a share. I said, Cheryl, why didn't you tell me? She said, Bob, you know that's illegal. I said, oh, okay. But she wrote this book, Dare to Serve, and in that, she asked what we just shared with you. And when I heard that question, what are the 3 or 4 events that most shaped your life? It was like, wow, I like that question. I could hardly wait to find somebody to ask it to. Well, the very next morning, one of my colleagues in Canada with Crew, he's the Associate Leadership Development Director for all of Canada. I had the privilege of coaching him. I've known Neil for 12 years. I really thought I knew Neil's whole story. But I said, Neil, I just heard this fabulous question yesterday or came across it. Can I ask it? Of course, Bob. That's what you and I do. We ask questions. I said, Neil, what would you say are the 3 or 4 events that have most shaped your life? Neil said, Bob, have I ever shared with you that my birth father died when I was 9 months old? I said, Neil, no, I've never heard that one. He said, my mother later remarried, and my stepfather is really the one in my heart of hearts who feels like my dad, because I have no memory of my birth father. But he said my mom, my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, even as recently as last month, reminded me again that in the final weeks of my birth father's life, he was at home in a big bed. And day after day, he would ask to hold me for hour upon hour. And during that time, he prayed over me that God the Father would be a father to this little boy that he knew himself he would not be able to raise. Well, as Neil was sharing that, we both began to shed tears. And with that simple question, within 5 minutes, a relationship that was good went to another level. All because I'd asked, what are the 3 or 4 events that most shaped your life? Patrick Lencioni, one of my favorite authors, in his book, 3 Signs of a Miserable Job, shared that one of those signs is to be working somewhere where you're unknown. Yeah, they may know your first name, they're not even sure of your last name. They know nothing about your history. They know nothing about your family. They know nothing about any personal challenges you may be facing with a child, with aging parents, with a spouse, illness. They know nothing of that. And that's a sign of a miserable job. Well, Cheryl Batchelder didn't want that to be one of the signs at Popeyes. And so a question managers ask of their employees is, can you share those 3 or 4 things? Now, not always will the answers be as dramatic as the one I just shared with you about me. But right now, I would like you to turn again to whoever you just shared with and just share one. And you're not going to have a chance to share the story. You're kind of giving the first sentence. The first sentence of something that you would say is one of the events that have shaped who you are today. And again, I'm going to give you now about 2 minutes with a partner to share that with each other. You don't need my permission, but you have my permission to continue that conversation. Afterwards, set a time to have breakfast or coffee or lunch, because if you actually answered this question of each other, and again, I don't know who you're seating next to that. I don't know who you are sitting next to right now. If it's somebody you've known for a long time. But I found that if two people who've never met will share the answer to this question, they will feel like they know each other better than some people they've known for a lifetime. It's an incredible question. Think about if you have employees, and again, it's not like you're going to get them all together and just go for this. But from time to time, as you have opportunity to ask them to share that, and you're going to learn things about them that you don't know, but they're going to have a sense of being known by you that's going to connect them at a heart level to you that you previously to this will not have had, or it will deepen that. You may have a good relationship like I had with Neil, but it took it to another level. Okay, let me ask another person here to read this one for me.
Telling creates resistance, asking creates relationships.
Wow, simple wisdom. And then, again, one of the books, and I always like to point out, I did not write this book. I also point out to people who've said, nope, I haven't read your book. I've actually said, have you read the 4 Gospels? Yes, you've read my book. Because all I did, if you notice at the bottom, it says compiled. It doesn't say authored. It's authored by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And of course, they were recording the questions that Jesus had asked. And so my question is, and again, in the NIV, it might be different in different translations, but in the New International Version, if you look at all the question marks after Jesus' questions, it adds up to 339. Why did Jesus ask so many questions? And again, just shout out some answers to me, please. Make people think.
You wanted to get their understanding.
He wanted to get their understanding.
You could relate their answer.
He could relate to their answer. Find out where their heart is. Get their attention. Get their attention.
It's the rabbinic way.
The rabbinic way, yes.
Seek understanding.
Key to understanding. Get them to understand themselves.
He was interested in them.
He was interested in them. Now, when you read through the 339 questions, you're going to see some of them are remarkably ordinary. The woman at the well, can you give me a drink? That question started a whole conversation, but the first question was so ordinary, kind of thing. And recently, I guess it's 3-4 months ago, I suddenly had a thought that I hadn't had before, related to this. And that is, the scripture says that Jesus, the Trinity, was involved in creation. And so, human beings, our brain, our heart, our emotions, our will, the incredible way in which we are created, Jesus was there. Now, if a guy, gal, who is a computer programmer writes a program, a complicated program, might they be the best one to know how to leverage that program? I realize sometimes the user figures out other ways, but generally it would be the person who writes the program that understands how to leverage it. Now, it's really interesting to me that Jesus as a communicator, and again, I'm a follower of Jesus, but even for people who are not, wouldn't it be wise to study the one who many think was one of the world's greatest communicators? Just to see what was his principles of communication. What's interesting to me is that Jesus majored in two things. He asked great questions, he told great stories. And I think in both of those, he was actually leveraging the design of the brain. It's fascinating on stories. How many of you, 2-3 days from now, could tell someone the story I shared about Neil and his birth father? How many of you could share that story? Without having to say, oh, I need to memorize that, I need to write it down, I need to study it. I was a history major. I had to do a lot of memorization of random facts. They didn't just stick here automatically. But when we hear a story, it sticks automatically. And the second thing is, he asked questions. He knew that if you actually wanted to create change in people, their answering would create the change versus being told. And so, just some of the reasons he asked so many questions. Now, two of my most favorite questions that Jesus asked were, number one, who do people say that I am? Let me just share something practical here. If you want to get people to talk, ask them what others are thinking. Hey, what do the rest of the people in this church think about? Hey, what do your neighbors think about? What do people in Sioux Falls think about? And people will quickly start answering that question. We kind of love to tell people what others are saying. And we do that very comfortably. So Jesus started with a very practical question here in asking, who do people say that I am? And of course, they immediately began to respond with all sorts of answers. But then, Jesus asked the second question, but what about you? Who do you say that I am? For me, it was the fall of 1967 at the University of South Dakota and the ATL fraternity house that I first heard a clear presentation of the good news of Jesus. A group of fraternity men from Iowa State who were involved with Cru came and spoke in our house. The first three of them shared how they had committed their lives to Christ at Iowa State. The fourth one shared the four spiritual laws. Later that night, I placed my faith in Christ. My life did not change immediately, but it's never been the same since. And over time, begin to understand who Jesus really was. If you're not sure, Cru City, Sioux Falls, as we get to the end, I'll share, but they want to make this book available by my colleague of 24 years, Josh McDowell, and the book More Than a Carpenter. And this is an incredible book. I forget the exact, I think it's somewhere around 30 million in print in 46 different languages. An interesting tidbit, I made 18 trips to Russia with Josh. There are more copies of this book in Russian, distributed throughout Russia, than there are in English. We had an opportunity to actually provide this book to 1 million Russian soldiers. And it was just an incredible opportunity. And at any rate, for anyone who would like, we'll share at the end how you can get this book. And Cru Sioux Falls is going to be delighted to put it into your hands. Okay, would you like to know the 4 questions one consultant uses to make a 6-figure income? I have to see hands if you'd like to know this. We can go on to the next slide if you really don't care. Okay. Linda, I'm not going to ask you to respond to this, but these are so simple, you'll have them memorized the first time you hear them also. So here they are. What's going well? What's not? Where are you stuck? What needs to change? Now he shared, and it was a he shared that if he was spending a day with you, he would spend the whole morning on question 1. What's going well? And he'd say, no, tell me more. How'd you figure that out? What else? And would spend that whole morning on hearing all of the stories of the home runs you're hitting. And only after lunch would he go on to question 2. Now, I was sharing this on Tom Ziegler's broadcast. And we got to this part, and Tom Ziegler, that's the son of Zig Ziglar. Zig passed a couple of years ago. Tom Ziegler now runs Ziegler in Dallas, of course, across the globe, and headquartered in Dallas. And Tom said, can I share with you why that first question is so important? I said, Tom, it's your program. You can say anything you want. Tom said, Bob, I'm a bit of a brain nerd. I've studied brain science. And when the brain is processing positive things, positive endorphins are firing, he said, that is the ideal place in which anyone can be best at solving problems. Because they're solving them while they're feeling like they're a winner. He said, if question 1 wasn't there and you started with, what's not going well? He said, what you're really asking people to do is to say, yep, I'm a loser. And then you want them to solve problems. In that context, it just doesn't work very well. Now, I think many times as I look at these 4 questions, as leaders, we keep looking at the watch, saying, oh my, I don't have time to talk about all the things going well. We got a problem we got to solve. So we jump just into the problem and we wonder why we aren't being very effective. Most of us don't take time enough at work or at home, in other organizations we're a part of, to start with what's going well, to celebrate what's going well, so that the problem is in a context of, hey, we're doing great in this area, this area, this area, we're winners, but let's address this one area that's a challenge here. Now, again, imagine this consultant has spent the whole morning with you on what's going well. By noon, you're thinking that he's thinking that you're one of the most brilliant leaders he's ever consulted with. So after lunch, when he asks, what's not going well, would you then feel comfortable actually being honest? Sure. Yeah, there's a couple things here. But if at 8 in the morning he started with what's not going well here, we'd all be hesitant to really say, because it'd be like, yep, I'm a loser. But in the context of all the things going well, we actually get to that. If you were a new member to a board and you're wondering, what might I ask in the first meeting? Here's 4 questions that will make it look like you're brilliant. And will create this most helpful discussion, just to give you, they'll think you're doing it so you can have context on what's going on in the board. Of course you'll have context. But it'll also be helpful for them to see the progression of what's going well, what's not, where we're stuck, what needs to change. If you want to be effective at leading with questions, what's the first thing required every time you ask a question? Listen. Might it be you then have to listen? Yes. Here's a quote. Can I get you to read this one?
When I ask people to talk about the best boss they've ever had, they always mention one quality: listening.
Thank you. And then, if I can get your help on this, Jim.
Listening and letting people talk to key to winning them over in life, in business, and in the human relationships.
Thanks, Jim. Leading with questions requires listening. James said, be quick to listen and slow to speak. And again, King Solomon said, he who answers before listening, that is his folly and his shame. I can hear Sherry saying, Robert, you don't even know the question and you're already trying to tell me what to do. Yes, my folly and my shame. In a moment, I'm going to have you raise your hands and tell me which one you are, but how do you rate yourself as a listener? Are you above average, average, or below average? How many of you would say you're above average as a listener? Okay, fabulous. How many of you would say you're average? How many of you would say you are below average? Okay, I appreciate the honesty. Now that I know what you think, how would your spouse or a close friend rate you as a listener? How many of your spouses would rate you above average? I see a few less hands. How many of you would say average? Your spouse would say average? How many of your spouses would say you're below average? Okay, I see a lot more hands now. Again, thank you for honesty. These 3 questions always remind me of something unrelated, but I saw this, maybe you read it at some point. 90% of all American drivers rate themselves as above average. Now, if you know anything about the curve of that, that's not statistically possible. But of course, as we're driving out there, who are the road demons? Anyone going faster than you? I heard the Iowans, that's not very kind. Who are the snails out there? Anyone going slower than you? Because who's driving the ideal speed? You are. So no wonder we rate ourselves in the above average. Well, we can kind of do that as listeners too. So here is absolutely one of my most favorite quotes. This one hangs in the room of my office, or in my office. Could you read this?
Being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable.
Yeah. Let that one sink in just a little bit. Sometimes in work relationships, it's inappropriate to say to a staff member, I love you. But when you actually listen to them, they're going to feel love. It may not equate, oh, my boss loves me, but it does have that feeling of well-being. Well, when it comes to listening, one thing I've found that does not work to becoming a better listener is just to try harder. Do we have any golfers in the room? Raise your hand if you're a golfer. I have a question for you then. I don't know if you've ever worked with a golf pro, but if a golf pro is looking at you swing and they say, I have a tip for you. I just want you to try harder. How helpful would that be?
Not so great.
Yeah. You imagine a batting coach telling a batter who's in a slump, you just need to try harder. Well, I am not going to tell you as improving listening skills by trying harder. I'm going to share, I think there's 3 tips on how you can become a better listener. And the first tip is the 8-second rule. Now, when you think of 8 seconds, what do you first think of? Bull riding. Exactly, that's what I thought of. Now, 8 seconds on one hand seems so short, but in bull riding, is it an eternity? It is an eternity. Actually, the way we're going to apply it here is going to feel like an eternity. Because here's the problem. Most of us, when we ask a question, we only wait 2 or 3 seconds for the person to respond. And if they haven't responded in 2 or 3 seconds, we either restate the question, ask a different question, give the answer ourselves, or just move on. And here's what's really interesting. With total unawareness that we've even done that. In other words, it's not intentional, it's just we're uncomfortable with the silence. We haven't thought through it. So we ask a question. Well, let me ask it again. Let me say it this way. Or here's what I'm thinking, and we just move on. The 8-second rule is ask a question and relax and wait, but comfortably. And in your own head, start counting 1001, 1002, 1003, and give them at least 8 seconds. Sometimes when you ask a tough question, it may be 12, 13 seconds. Just relax. They will answer. Scott, can I ask you a question? Scott, what would you say is the greatest leadership lesson you've ever learned?
Leadership lesson?
Mm-hmm.
Treat others as you want to be treated.
Okay, thank you. I was counting. You were probably counting too. Scott answered at about 5 seconds. Now his dad's from Parkston originally, so he's got great DNA. Often when I ask that particular question, because it requires processing, it will be 10, 12 seconds before somebody answers. The fact that I'm comfortable with that silence allows them time to think, and then to share a great answer like, treat others the way you want to be treated. So, the first listening tip is the 8-second rule. If you apply that, it'll change you as a listener. The second tip is don't hijack the conversation. May I ask you a question? Where did you go on your last vacation?
To Washington State.
Wow, I used to live in Washington State. Man, I love Washington State. We lived in Ellensburg, Washington. It was on I-90. I mean, you get on here in Sioux Falls and just head west. And we had a fabulous time. And we'd go to Seattle on the weekends, da-da-da-da-da-da. What did I just do? Yeah. Now, sometimes it'll be kind of like this. We'll say, hey, you were gone. Where have you been? And they'll say, went to Washington State. And instead of, it's irrelevant that I used to live there, okay? Wow, what took you to Washington? Why Washington State?
Family reunion.
Who was there?
My daughter, my mother, my brother, my sister, brother-in-law, grand.
And where in Washington?
We actually were in Ellensburg, we were in Yakima and Seattle.
Incredible. Incredible. Well, I have. Now, who was located in Ellensburg that took you there?
My daughter was there.
And what she do there?
She's owns a pet store.
Wow. Wow. Now, again, in a longer conversation, the fact is, don't hijack. But how many times when somebody says, just got back from Disney World and you've been there, is there a temptation to then tell your Disney World story? Or in my case, I mean, my goodness, I had no idea. An Ellensburg connection. We spent 3 years in Ellensburg. See how I could hijack it so easily? But if you're wanting to find out about them, if you're wanting to improve as a listener, keep asking them questions about their vacation, their trip, their issue, their experience, instead of, now, he was so kind, at some point, he said, have you ever been to Ellensburg? Or was a question like that. And open the door for me to share. It's not that you can never share, but it's like stay focused on finding out more about their experience, letting them tell their story, even if their story is one that you've also had. Here's another one. Ask the second question. There's a book actually called The Second Question, written by a guy in Australia who is a psychologist, who's been a psychologist for, I don't know, 30-some years. And he happened to go back to his hometown, and he was spending time with his best high school friend. And the father of that high school friend, who had been again, a friend, but a friend of a dad of his close classmate, he happened to meet him again. And he said, the father said to him, what have you been doing for the last 30 years? He said, well, I've become a psychologist. His second question was, what have you learned about people in 30 years of being a psychologist? And he went like, wow, what a terrific second question. And that was such an experience to him that he actually wrote a book about that. But the value of asking that second question. Now, that one may be a kind of a profound one. After, what do you think? What else, what else, what else? What's my next favorite question? Remember Johnny? Can you please tell me more? So when you're stuck with like, what could the second question be? You can always ask, can you please tell me more? But usually there'll be part of the answer, like we went to Washington. Well, how'd you choose Washington? Well, he told me that's where his daughter lives. That's where they gathered for the reunion. And there's something in that answer that you can then use to ask another question. And you keep focused on them and listening versus moving on to something else. You just simply ask the second question. Can I let you read this one?
A question not asked is a door not opened.
Yes. Questions open doors. And then here's one of my, again, absolute most favorite quotes. This one is on the wall of my office also. And Kathy, can you read this one, please?
The leader of the past may have been a person who knew how to tell, but certainly the leader of the future will be a person who knows how to ask.
Thank you. A leader who leads with questions will often be 10 times more effective than a leader who only leads by telling. I've got some gifts for you. And the first gift is I would love for you to subscribe to my blog. It's called leadingwithquestions.com. That name is in the books. It's also in the business cards that I inserted into each book, kind of as a bookmark. But it's free, and every Monday and Thursday morning, you'll get a short email from me with some great questions you can use to lead with. Now there's a story, there's always a story. Remember, I'm a charter member of Tellers Anonymous, so there's always a story. When I launched my blog 6 years ago, I had a crisis. I decided to post Monday and Thursdays twice a week. 8 weeks into this experience, 16 posts into this experience, I had a crisis. I was completely out of content. I shared everything I knew up to that point. And I sat in my office that morning and said, okay, now I understand why I've seen other blogs that had all this activity and then nothing. I now know they ran out of content. And I sat there that morning thinking, okay, do I fold it up now or what do I do? And then I had this idea. I think the Lord gave me the idea, but it's not that deep. But the idea was, as I had started the blog, I had searched a little bit on Google to see was anyone else blogging in this narrow space of just leading with questions. And I couldn't find anybody, so that was the green light to go forward. But as I did that search, I had found some individual posts on broader leadership blogs that related to this theme of leading with questions. So that morning I went and found 5 that I thought were pretty good, figured out the email addresses for the authors, and sent off emails to the authors of those posts asking if I might have their permission to repost their post as a guest post on my blog. Of course, with full attribution to them, their photo, their bio, any web links they wanted. Hit send 5 times, wondered if I'd hear from anybody. Within 24 hours, I had 5 yeses. What I know now that I didn't know the day I sent them is that bloggers write to be read. Bloggers, by and large, aren't writing to make money directly with what they're writing. They're just writing to share it with an audience. So if they've shared it with everyone they know, and I tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, could I share it with some folks I know? It's like, well, of course. But I didn't know that then. I know that now. If you follow my blog today, you'll realize Bob is much more a curator of great content. And you're the beneficiary because you're not just hearing Bob's ideas, you're hearing from leaders around the globe sharing their very best thoughts on this topic of leading with questions, along with the questions they love to ask. One of the requirements of every blog post is that it contain what I call turnkey ready questions. You hear the question, you say, I can use that one. It's like when you heard the 4 questions from the consultant, what's going well, what's not, where are you stuck, what needs to change. It's like, wow, those are turnkey ready. I can turn around and ask staff those questions this afternoon. So I would love to have you subscribe and stay in touch. Then, as Dave shared at the beginning, on your chairs were my first book, Great Leaders Ask Questions, the written version as well as the audio CD. But it is also available as a free ebook and a free MP3 download. So if you like it, just know you can share it with all your staff via sending them to my website where they can download it absolutely for free. And then the same with 339 questions Jesus asked. They can download it absolutely for free. And you can share it with not only your staff, but clients, potential clients, friends. And please position it when you share it as your gift to them, not my gift. Share it in a way in which you'll get relational benefit from it. So, how do we do today? Raise your hand if you felt like you've grown as a leader during this time. Did you find some additional ways to get better results from your people than the usual command and control? Did you get some new listening tips? Are you going to remember the 8-second rule? Great. In wrapping up, Dave Larson had to run, had an appointment he needed to get to, but he's asked me to close. In the middle of your table, is a card. If you'll pull those out and pass those around, there's also pens if you don't have your own. And I'm going to share with you how you can get more than a carpenter. Here's a couple of things. Obviously, you know how to fill out the top part there. I want to give you an extra box, though, to write in between the top part and the first box. And that is, if you would like the PowerPoint that I've shared today, just write the word PowerPoint. Of course, make sure you've included your email. And Dave Larson will make sure that the PowerPoint is forwarded to you. So again, between the information on top and the first box, just write PowerPoint and they will get that to you. Then, if you'll check, if you want to get the book More Than a Carpenter by Josh McDowell, Dave and his team will be delighted to get it to you. If you'll check that you're interested in knowing more about a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, Dave will get that to you. Then, interested in growing in your faith, Crusoe Falls has a number of Bible studies that go on throughout the city, different days of the week, different mornings. And if you'd be interested in that, check the second box. And again, Dave will get you the information. Also, if you'd be interested in knowing more about Cruise City Sioux Falls, check that. And if you want to be added to the database to be informed of upcoming events like this one, different speakers coming into Sioux City, check that box. And if you have any additional comments, please feel free to write it on the back. And then if you'll just, someone at the table, collect those and reinsert it back into the envelope in the center, that will be absolutely perfect. It's been my absolute pleasure to be with you today. Great to be in South Dakota, and wish you well. Love to meet as many of you. I'm going to stay here. I'm not running out quickly, but I realize some of you've got to run out quickly. So have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.